It's Sunday, November 30, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to The Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. Our guest today is a journalist widely recognized for her in-depth reporting on the intersection of technology, power, and politics as the Silicon Valley correspondent for The Washington Post. Elizabeth Dwoskin, welcome to The Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
Elizabeth, an article that you wrote earlier this month was entitled "The Secretive Donor Circle That Lifted J.D. Vance Is Now Rewriting MAGA's Future."
It's a long headline.
It's a great headline. I mean, and it tells us kind of where this conversation is going to go, and that is that there's obviously a lot of talk at the moment about Donald Trump's frailty, both mentally and physically. I mean, he's literally rotting from the inside out before the cameras. And while some people are celebrating that, if Donald Trump was compromised to the extent that he wasn't able to president anymore, that's not the end of the MAGA movement, is it? If anything, it might be the start, the touch paper being lit for a whole new chapter of this far-right Christian nationalist movement. Is that how you see it?
The story was my attempt to create a portrait of one of the most powerful political networks in America that is barely known. I mean, if you compare it to donor networks like the Koch brothers and their influence on politics, that has been well covered. But the network that was started by the man that I profiled, whose name is Chris Buskirk, is just it's very little known, and yet it is the movement that in some ways it's lifting J.D. Vance. It's going to be responsible in many ways for for architecting his political future. It's the reason that the tech right, the tech billionaires have moved to the right and had a place to put both their money and their energies. And so this fusion that we see now between like MAGA populism and billionaires, which it's very poorly understood. I wrote this story to explain that. How does that work? And then how does that carry the movement forward if and when Trump is no longer the standard bearer for the movement?
So this Rockbridge Network that you write about, with these characters such as Peter Thiel and Chris Buskirk behind it, how far ahead of Trump's re-election was this set up? How long have they been planning this stuff for, and how involved were they in getting him elected earlier last year?
So it's a really fascinating story, was an untold story until I wrote my piece, which is always really exciting for a reporter to be really telling a first draft of what I would say is a big and untold chapter in our political history right now. So this group actually started in 2019, and the seeds of it were planted in the 2016 election. You had Peter Thiel, at the time, Silicon Valley billionaire, who famously invested in Facebook and Palantir. He was the first investor in Facebook, one of the co-founders of Palantir. He's
of PayPal as well, right? Going back.
The PayPal
with Elon
mafia.
Musk, right?
I mean, Thiel, whether you agree with him or disagree with him politically, there's no one I know in Silicon Valley who doesn't think that he's one of the best spotters of talent that the industry has ever produced. And he's spotted not just generational tech talent like Mark Zuckerberg or Sam Altman, but he's also picked political talent. And so about a year and a half ago, I wrote a piece about how he anointed, and I put the word anointed in the headline, how he had really anointed J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is also someone he picked. Around the 2016 election, you have two things going on. You have Trump running for the first time for the presidency. And at the time, even the small Silicon Valley is very liberal, but the right in Silicon Valley, the small, powerful right, kind of led by Peter Thiel in many ways, they didn't really know who to support. And then Peter Thiel comes out really strongly for Trump, and he gets attacked like left and right. Now, what he does this very publicly. He donates $1 million. He speaks at the RNC. What's also happening behind the scenes is that he hired J.D. Vance, who at the time was just a Yale Law School graduate, who was had a very inexperienced career. And basically Vance had heard Thiel speak at Yale, got inspired by the speech, and reached out to him. And someone I spoke to at the time said there was this feeling, even then, this is before he publishes Hillbilly Elegy. So it's before he publishes this bestseller and J.D. Vance becomes a well-known person. Before that's happening, Peter Thiel had spoke to him, got to know him, And as one of his colleagues, and who told me at the time, had this feeling of we need to, quote, find a place for him in the network. And in Thiel's world, it's often referred to by the people in that world as the network. So they knew they were going to find a place for him. And he goes and he works for one of Thiel's funds. And Thiel basically finds Vance a job. And so Thiel is shepherding Vance through Silicon Valley as sort of this budding investor. And he's also started to write his book, Hillbilly Elegy, comes out in 2016, just before the 2016 election. And the book is about, it's about the working class. So you have this conversation in America about working class alienation, the working class in America moving to the right. You have these very wealthy people in Silicon Valley who are actually, for them, Trump's win was a big awakening. And you have this actual conversation in Silicon Valley among the people who are building AI and actually trying to like they're having dinner parties where they're like, what if there's no jobs in 10 years and that's our responsibility? What do we do with the working class? And there's this conversation about basic income, the universal basic income. Should we support that? There's this whole conversation going on among the tech titans and wealthy people in tech about if there's no jobs in the future and we're exacerbating this political rage, how responsible should we be for it and what should we do about it? And JD Vance is at those dinner parties in some of those conversations. Thiel held dinner parties to introduce Vance to people. So one of the people that Thiel introduced Vance to was this, not a guy in tech, but this very random businessman in Arizona named Chris Buzzkirk. Sorry for my long wind up, but I actually think the history is very interesting. I hope you do too.
100%. So did they want Vance because he kind of had this poor upbringing and he would be able to maybe connect with the types of working people that maybe the elite didn't really know much about?
Yeah, it was almost like he was this passport, this translator. I think someone at the time who went to one of the dinner parties described it to me as like he was this translator of this world that these people in Silicon Valley and these really wealthy people didn't understand. And it was very clear to them, as it was clear to almost everyone around JD Vance, that he was going to have a political future. If you talk to people that now who are friends, they'll say, we didn't know if he was going to run. The relationship had nothing to do with politics. And I think that's all true for some people. But I think there was a feeling, and I'm not in Thiel's mind here, but I think there was a feeling, as there was in all the circles Vance hung out in, that this guy could have a political future. And so this is 2016. It's before JD has ever run. Thiel has recently become friendly with this Arizona businessman named Chris Buzzkirk. Chris Buzzkirk has nothing to do with tech. And I love writing about these figures that are very powerful, but I would call tech adjacent. Buzzkirk becomes friends with Thiel because they're both involved in supporting Trump. Buzzkirk is a guy who made a fair amount of money in the insurance business in Arizona. He's from Scottsdale. His family had this like mom and pop insurance company, which he basically built into multiple companies. Around this time, he was stepping back from those companies, sold off some of the companies, and was looking to, as he told me, and I don't believe he's given an interview to the mainstream media before, but as he told me, he was looking to, quote, become more effective. He often uses that word, become more effective. And so they became friends. Thiel started giving him some money to start early political PACs and activism, which he had never done before, and then introduces him to Vance. And basically, over a year and a half, Thiel introduces Buzzkirk to Vance, and basically they start having these conversations about the future of the right. And remember, it's worth remembering, J.D. Vance was not a Trump supporter at the time. In fact, He was a never Trumper at the time. But Thiel,
and an atheist as well.
Yeah, but Thiel, later he converted to Catholicism.
Yeah.
And Thiel is a devout Christian and a Christian nationalist. Buzzkirk is also a devout Christian. If you look at all of his books, he dedicates all of his books to his wife, his family, and Christ the King. That's those books are. His Christianity is a big part of his life too. I don't know if he and Thiel, if they had bonded in their relationship about religion, but certainly they bonded about politics. Buzzkirk and Vance become good friends. And in 2019, you have the seminal moment, which I opened up my story with this scene, which is there's this little nothing town called Rockbridge, Ohio, very rural part of Ohio. And basically Thiel, Buzzkirk, J.D. Vance, Tucker Carlson, the economist Orrin Cass, and a number of Rebecca Mercer, who was a big, big donor. The Mercers were huge Trump donors. They rented out these bungalows in this nothing town, in 100-person town in Rockbridge, Ohio. And they wanted to talk about the future of the MAGA movement after Trump. And this is 2019. So we're heading into the 2020 election at this point. And some of these groups, some of these people were avid Trump supporters, but some of them were thinking Trump may not win. You know, some of them were disappointed. Like Thiel himself at the time was actually quite disappointed in the outcome of the first Trump administration. And so they're having these conversations. Blake Masters, who later ran for Senate in Arizona, who was a protege of Thiel as well, he was there for that weekend. So they're having this conversation about how do we create, it was two questions that they were looking at when they asked, what is MAGA? What role could we play in MAGA after Trump? The first thing was MAGA doesn't have a donor class. It doesn't have a Koch brothers. You know, the Koch brothers were very against protectionist trade policies. They're all about free trade. Their organizations, Americans for Prosperity, it's free trade is a huge plank of their politics.
And so is the Heritage Foundation, as I understand it. They also offer free trade. So this is a kind of slightly left field direction for this traditional support.
Yes, the think tanks, the mega donors of the Republican Party were not oriented toward Trump in any way. Some of them were never Trumpers. Some of them were stepping out of politics, but there wasn't. And so Buskirk and Thiel and the others who were there, they had this conversation first about, are there donors like us that would support this movement? And if so, how do we convene them? And then the second part is, what can we do to organize and rally the working class voters, this coalition that appears to be emerging and voted for Trump in the 2016 election? You know, not all working class voters did. There's lots of political science about whether the working class tied. It turns out working class voters had been steadily moving right since about 2000, and it tracks with the erosion of unions. So don't walk away from this conversation thinking working class voters saw Trump in 2016 and they all went for him and it was a fluke. Yeah. But at the time, a lot of these people there did think that it was very surprising that so many working class people were voting Republican because of Trump. And they said, what can we do to keep this coalition going in future elections? And so it was tying, Buskirk created an equation. It was a one-liner, and it was brains plus money plus base. That was his equation for what he wanted to do. And that's why they created what's called the Rockbridge Network. And if you're a political junkie, you might have heard of it, but there have been very, very little reporting about what it does, what role it played in the 2024 election, and what role it plans to play in future elections.
What's so interesting here is, you know, a gap in the analysis has been, how did J.D. Vance turn from a never-Trumper? There's all these clips of him criticizing Trump and calling him various names, and also being an atheist, and then suddenly like pivoting, and suddenly working in finance, and suddenly being converting his religion, and then suddenly supporting Trump to the extent, well, certainly being given this seat to actually get into Congress, and then being Trump's kind of right hand. Trump has, as I see it, doesn't really care for J.D. Vance. I mean, is it right that it was Donald Trump Jr. that kind of convinced his father that Vance would be a good cohort for the vice presidency?
Well, yes, Trump Jr. to bring in Don Jr. Don Jr. didn't know Buskirk at the time, but they have become very close friends and business partners, which we should definitely talk about. They're creating this club in Washington, D.C. that they launched called, they're calling it Executive Branch. They say they're not in any way selling access to the presidency, which is what ethics and conflicts of interest experts have argued. Because they are so close to the administration. The club costs $500,000 a head to be a member. It's invite only. And what they say is it's a place for Trump business people like them who are affiliated with the administration or close to the administration to have a place to meet in DC. And what critics have said about this group, this club, is that, well, it's almost like Don Jr. is a founder. If you wanted to get access to the president, it's almost like, this is what the critics say, it's almost like paying $500,000 to get access to the president's inner circle. Now, they counter that. They have a strong counter to that too. But to speed up the story, Don Jr. is a big part of this Buzzkirk, JD Vance, Peter Thiel story. The relationship develops a couple years later in around 2020, 2022 during COVID. Don Jr., Buzzkirk, and their partner, who they're now all three in business together in a venture capital firm called 1789 Capital. That all started around 2022. Buzzkirk is down in Palm Beach hosting a Rockbridge event at Mar-a-Lago. Okay. Trump is basically on the outs at this time. Like, people didn't think he had a political future. This is a year after the insurrection. The lawsuits are mounting.
He's in exile in Mar-a-Lago, effectively.
He's effectively in exile. And so you have to think about the people who are still believers in Trump. At this point, JD Vance has become one, but the people who are still believers in Trump are like in their party. It's a smaller group. Even that right-wing group, you think about David Sachs, who's now in the administration. David Sachs at the time would have been supporting DeSantis, would have been supporting Ron DeSantis.
Yes.
So a lot of these figures were actually hoping DeSantis would become the standard bearer. And JD Vance in 22, he's running for the Senate. So he's just launching his first political campaign ever. And a friend of his named Omin Malik, a donor who used to be a Democrat, a Wall Street guy, basically turns against the Democratic Party during COVID, moves down to Florida, buys a place in Palm Beach, and decides, okay, I'm going to host a fundraiser for Vance in Palm Beach, 2022. So he invites, and Omid is good friends with Don Jr. So he invites Don Jr., JD Vance is down there. Blake Masters is down there. They did a fundraiser for him too. He was running at the same time, and Buzzkirk was also backing his super PAC, and Buzzkirk. And the way the story was described to me was there was this week in 2022 where they came down both for this Rockbridge conference at Mar-a-Lago and for the fundraiser that Omid was throwing. And they all became like friends. Like, it was this bonding week for them. And what comes out of that week, it's like, okay, it's just a story, but what comes out of the week is like these fascinating it has fascinating political ramifications for the country, because then you have Omid, Don Jr., and Buzzkirk going into business together, creating 1789 Capital. I don't know if you want to chat about 1789 Capital, but we can go there.
Well, it's always interesting how they drop little clues as to kind of where their thinking is. And in the case of choosing historical dates and things like that to kind of back up their politics. Just briefly, let's talk about these kind of businesses such as 1789 Capital, whereby it's almost like a storefront with not much behind it. Even though they're trading and making huge sums of money, that's not necessarily the reason for this partnership.
Before we go there, I should answer your question, which is this weekend in 2022 is when Don Jr. essentially becomes friendly with JD Vance. And they become friendly, and that friendship develops and develops. And then Don Jr. becomes one of the people advocating for his father 2 years later to pick JD Vance as VP. It was also David Sachs was also a big advocate, Elon Musk, but those people came later. Like I said, those people weren't supporting Trump.
Sure.
But the friendship between Don Jr. and Vance is starting at that time. And then to your question was about, tell me again, it was about
1789 Capital, the way that they almost have these kind of cover businesses to enable them to kind of come together and work. The front kind of looks like it's a finance company, but behind the scenes there's an awful lot of politics going on.
So it's an interesting venture capital firm. None of those people who started it, Buzzkirk, as I told you, whose background was insurance, Omid, whose background was on Wall Street, they weren't strong venture. And then in after Trump won, we'll get there, Don Jr. himself joins as a partner in the firm. But Don Jr. had been in business with Malik, Omid, doing SPACs as well. Like, they did a company together called Grab a Gun, which is like an online gun marketplace. So they start this fund together they call it 1789 Capital, named after the year that the Bill of Rights is proposed. And their early thesis is like to create what they were calling the anti-woke economy. So this is a moment when, after George Floyd, you have a lot of American businesses basically committing to DEI principles, committing to ESG principles. And they were basically like, screw that. that's screwing a lot of companies, coal companies, for example, or companies that don't want to, in their minds, buy into this. And so they wanted to fund companies that they said were being left out. They were like, if you ask them, what they'll say is, the left did this to us. The left came for corporate America. Corporate America shouldn't have been involved in these types of politics. Because corporate America became involved in these politics, we then had to create a counter movement, a counter business movement. So it's a movement that unites politics and business and say, we're going to fund companies that are left out of this woke economy, that they believe the economy is becoming woke. Another example they use a lot is ESG funds. So you have, funds, which essentially they say, like, we will not invest in coal companies or companies that do oil and gas. We're going to create more like green energy funds. Like, they're totally against that. And then they also invested in some funds that are just some companies that are just really political in their nature, like Rumble. It's a right-wing news outlet. They were early investors in Rumble. They were early investors in this grab a gun marketplace. They were invested in what people call like the steroids Olympics. It's an Olympic Games that they're trying to create. It almost could be in some ways like a parody of a libertarian investment, right? Because it's an Olympic Games where the athletes can take performance drugs,
yes,
performance enhancing drugs. So it's like a parallel Olympics. So there's political principles behind these investments. And some of them are also tied to people that they know politically as well.
It's very interesting just to kind of pause for a second and reset, because whilst all this is going on behind the scenes in far right and Christian nationalist and MAGA politics, on the left, there doesn't seem to be anything like the amount of effort that goes into trying to kind of plot the future of the country. It's almost, and I suppose this is why there was so much criticism of Joe Biden taking his time to decide if he was going to run again and then stepping down too late, and Kamala Harris not having enough time to run her campaign. It seems like there is so much more strategy on the right. And that is problematic, because it means that even going into the next elections, certainly the midterms and then 2028, we are going to see the results of all of this work and this effort come to fruition. And meanwhile, the Democrats are still arguing as to who's in charge. And so that is problematic for the country, isn't it? That there are a lot of brains, evil geniuses in many cases, who are desperate to keep America on this far-right track.
It's funny that you say this as, being at the Post, we are politically neutral. We don't step in with political opinions. But what I'll say from my reporting is that you have people, the whole reason that Chris Buzzkirk created the Rockbridge Network was because he felt that the left was better organized. And perhaps at the time it was, particularly around the working class. They had, you think Obama was a community organizer. He did get out the vote. You have immigrant rights groups that did get out the vote. You have historically organized labor, which is weakened, but did get out the vote. So you have...
But that's people rather than these kind of powerful figures. And we're seeing that now with like the Mamdani movement, that it's actually people power that seem to be pushing back. But on the right, it's more coming from these operators, these very wealthy operators.
And the right is having had a fissure too, because you have kind of everyone either jump on the Trump bandwagon or you have no influence. So even the Koch brothers, in some ways, their groups have actually found ways to align with the Trump administration in recent months, even though historically it's been a very prickly relationship. But yes, now you have those people who I described as basically, if you go back to 2019 when they're in that little town in Ohio, they don't realize at all. It's still surreal to them to this day that they gave rise and a conduit and organized such a significant political movement in America. And I think when people think Trump, the whole thing is a cult of personality. It's absolutely not a cult of personality around Trump. Trump is a cult of personality, but there are very powerful operatives like Chris Buzzkirk and strategists that are around him, thinking not just about him, but about the future and how you pass the torch. It's going to be duked out immensely. Look at what's happening in the news right now with Marjorie Taylor Greene resigning, the party, again, now the fracture isn't like the Chamber of Commerce versus the MAGA people. The fracture is within MAGA. It's within the billionaires and the wealthier class within MAGA that has one agenda, the populists and the working class, which have another agenda. And then you have this other question about the relationship of the business class that has so allied itself with the world, with the Trump administration. We brought up 1789 Capital. The fund has raised over $1 billion, almost all of assets under management, almost all of it since Trump won. So you have ethics people who are looking at this. You have a lot of people looking at this and saying, are they just trying to buy access to the president's son? You know, this firm it was a very small firm with a very small track record, but it had a lot of politically connected people. And then it added the president's son as a partner. Now it has $1 billion to play with. And they do accept money from foreign countries as well. They say countries that are allied with America, but I couldn't get a clear list on what that was either. Their argument, of course, and I should be very fair to give it, is that they say, Don Jr. has never been a politician. He's a businessman. They say that, that he should be allowed to be in business. And also they say that what they're doing at 1789 Capital is aligned with their goals for America in the sense that, and I think Chris Buzzkirk especially is a deep believer in the idea that if you fund like companies that are 3D printing rocket fuel, for example, you can rebuild America's industrial base and you can rebuild the middle class. They deeply believe, many of them do, I've spoken with many people in this universe, deeply believe that they can put money into these startups that will, in their mind, rebuild the middle class and rebuild the industrial base and basically create an economic proof point for Trump's political arguments and for MAGA's political arguments. Whether that comes to bear is like hugely open question. Any economist you talk to, even the supportive economists, will say that what the venture capital is doing, even in the most rosy, if you put the rosiest possible glasses on it, probably what they're doing would only be a drop in the bucket. It's not going to restore the middle class, but it's a good question of whether, it's in the right direction in terms of that. Now, the cynical argument is that the whole thing is a form of corruption. To which John Jr. will say, why should I step back from my business ventures just because my dad is the president? On the other hand, some of the companies that they've invested in, like Polymarket, for example, the Biden administration had opened up an investigation. They were looking into Polymarket, and that was dropped this summer, while the company is, and 1789 is a big investor in Polymarket. So it seems like some of the companies that they've invested in are starting to have some access to the administration. And the question is, do they get benefit from that against other competitors in the market? And are they getting special access because of Chris Buzzkirk's close relationship with J.D. Vance, because of Don Jr.'s relationship with his family?
Part of the problem, as you describe, is where we're headed in terms of Trump's original offering that he would bring back jobs and that, he would reindustrialize and all of these things. And none of that so far, certainly in this first year, has come to fruition. And in fact, much of the $22 trillion worth of investment that he claims he has negotiated for the U.S. does not exist. These are numbers that he has made up. The investment that is there seems to be in AI and tech and data centers and the types of things that do not really provide jobs for millions of people. And so there will come a flashpoint, I presume, whereby the kind of regular jobs that people have will continue to diminish and those jobs will not be replaced. And we saw this during the shutdown, a huge firing of workers, and they will not be brought back, and their jobs arguably will be replaced by AI and automation and robots. How does this problem that we kind of foresee, how is that solved by this kind of tech right? Because as you just described, a lot of it seems to be a kind of corrupt grift. There isn't really a desire to help people actually get back to work. There's no kind of true there's no generosity here, is there?
I mean, I spoke to, I don't know. I think you're being a little harsh. I actually think, like, if you speak to some of the companies that have been funded by the tech right, like I'll give this one example that I wrote about in the story. It's called Firehawk. It's a company that 3D prints rocket fuel. Rocket fuel, by the way, is solid. We think of fuel as a liquid.
Yeah.
Rocket fuel is actually a solid, and you have to like bury it in the ground. And then when the missiles need it, you take it out of the ground, you put it in the rocket, the missile, and you shoot the missile. So this guy who founded the company, Will Edwards, he had told me that he couldn't get anyone from Silicon Valley to put money into his company because this was when he was fundraising several years ago. No one in Silicon Valley wanted to work with the military. Like their whole strategy is around national defense. They're not selling an app, to a consumer.
Yeah,
they're selling it to the militaries, and they're using it for war and defense. So he couldn't get any investment. And 1789 and Chris Buzzkirk, they were one of the first people to invest in it. Chris was like, "That's ridiculous. You're a patriotic company." And what Will told me is that he has factories in Oklahoma. He has factories in Dallas. They didn't give me the number of people they employ. So, but those people, they said, and they had to find people who had some experience working as machinists. And America's industrial base is very hollowed out because a lot of these jobs disappeared in America decades ago. So you're hiring. So he basically said he was hiring people who, don't have college degrees, had some experience working with machines, and were making 6-figure salaries. So he was just telling me about his company, and he's one of the companies they've invested in. The counter argument it's not even a counter argument. You said to him, okay, there needs to be 1 million of you. You're one company. There needs to be 1 million of you to restore the gutted industrial base of America. But do I think from talking to some of these companies and seeing their operations that what some of them are doing will help restore jobs that are needed in America? Yes, I do. And do I believe that Will was turned down by Silicon Valley and couldn't get investment back in 2019 when Google had a major contract with the military Project Maven that it had to basically pull out of because its employees disagreed with that so much? Yes, I buy that. Not everything that they're doing makes sense. Like if you look at some of the stuff, so the Trump administration talks a lot about rare earths and rare earths minerals. If you look at the conversation around AI, to your point about AI, these deals are ultimately, if they benefit anyone, it's going to accrue to very wealthy Silicon Valley investors, company leaders, business people. I don't see that as anything that is going to help the working class. It's really going to help the wealthy classes if these deals go at all. Also, in some cases, the Trump administration has been claiming deals that have not gone to fruition or double counting them. You saw that during like the Saudi dinner, the dinner with the Saudi leader a week or so ago. What you saw was there were some deals that were announced then, but those were the same deals that had actually been announced at when they went to the Saudi investment conference a couple weeks before. So you never
Trump tried to kind of doorstep him and said it's going to be $1 trillion worth of investment. And Mohammed bin Salman was kind of caught a little off guard there. But, he just wants to, it's almost like pay to play with Donald Trump at the moment, certainly with the Saudis.
Well, what they would say is, the Saudi question is really, really complicated. But of course, these business people are saying, in this world of the tech right, what they're saying is this is exactly the relationship that elites, and they're not afraid of calling themselves elites. We should talk about that. There's a whole concept in that world called aristopopulism, which is uniting the beliefs and the interests of the elites with the populace. And so they think, yes, if it's good for me, it's going to be good for the country. And some of them believe that, and you have to assess whether you believe that. Jane Mayer did have a very good tweet about my story. She tweeted, these people, she said, they want a new aristocracy for America themselves.
Yeah, but it's all a reliance on trickle-down economics, which has been debunked by economists throughout the world. And yet Trump's entire policy for growth is based on either trickle-down or on tariffs, which is likely to be likely to be dumped by the Supreme Court. So, the country, I'm only saying this because I feel like all of these great ideas do seem to enrich the 1%. And economists have said that obviously those wealthiest people have grown. There's a Bernie Sanders argument as well, that the richest have got richer beyond your wildest dreams, but regular working people as well as the poor are getting poorer day by day. It seems to me there's almost like an invisible recession going on where, all this stuff is fine, but regular working people are relying on credit cards and they really are just treading water, waiting for this golden goose that Trump keeps talking about, whilst in the meantime he's building a ballroom and gold plating the Oval Office. So there's a lot of hypocrisy there.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and I think people there are some, you can see that the public is starting to question some of that and see some of that as a contradiction. Some parts of the public certainly are. Look at the No Kings protests.
Yeah.
I read the other week a really interesting piece by an economist who said that actually poverty in America and lower income should be defined as below $100,000 a year, earning $100,000 a year, not as it's defined now for a family earning about $31,000 a year, which is how it's defined since the 60s. That's been they've circulated this definition of lower income based on if a family's income is 3 times their cost for food. But this economist was saying that's like a completely outdated
right.
way of looking at poverty or, what it means to sustain a family, because since the 60s, housing is way more expensive. Childcare is way more expensive. In the 60s, one earner could afford a house and the other person didn't need to work. The wife at that time. So families weren't paying for childcare. Today, childcare, in my family, it's 40% of my budget, childcare.
Yes.
So yeah, I think, and you see that conflict as well within the MAGA movement, because you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and you have people like Buzzkirk and the tech elites. And you get the feeling, looking at the administration, that the tech elites are closer to Trump than the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the party.
It's so interesting that there are these factions that they all identify as Republicans, but arguably, if they were to split, there would be room for 3 or 4 parties here with a similar but differing mindset. And yet, because the two-party system is so baked into American politics that it's almost like all of these different characters have had to jump on the Republican bandwagon. We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk more about President J.D. Vance, potentially, and also your piece that you wrote about Peter Thiel's interesting speeches. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. The guys at True Classic started with a simple mission to bring premium, comfortable clothing to the masses, because looking and feeling great shouldn't come with a designer price tag. And clearly, people agree. People vote with their dollars, and True Classic has sold over 25 million shirts to more than 5 million customers and racking up over 200,000 5-star reviews. This brand isn't just about fabric or fit, it's about helping guys show up every day with confidence and purpose. Their shirts fit where they should, feel incredible, and don't break the bank. You get that tailored look without sacrificing comfort or blowing your budget. I've been wearing True Classic for a while now, and you can feel the difference the moment you throw one on. It's tailored where you want it, relaxed where you need it, no bunching, no stiff fabric, no BS, just a clean, effortless fit that actually works for real life. So, forget overpriced designer brands. Skip the cheap throwaway stuff. True Classic is built for comfort, built to last, and built to give back. You can find them on Amazon, Target, Costco, Sam's Club, or head to trueclassic.com/weekend to try them out for yourself. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on the Weekend Show with Elizabeth Dwoskin. I'm Anthony Davis. We've been discussing your article about J.D. Vance and this kind of support network that he has of wealthy financiers and people on the far right. And Peter Thiel is a name that obviously people probably know. Some people know. Palantir is a word that you mentioned. Maybe we should talk about what that is, because we've heard more and more about how Palantir is offering surveillance services to not just the US government, but even the UK government, as far as I understand it, and much of the rest of the world now. Mining
Israel also.
And Israel, yes, and mining data. And so this is why, there is this worry. We've heard that the Trump regime is bringing together the data that you have in Social Security and your health care and IRS and basically putting it all into one place, which is something that's never happened before.
And I think that might be a little overblown.
Oh, good. Well, that's nice to know. Tell me why.
So that was flicked at not in the Washington Post, but in the New York Times. When I did my own reporting on it and did my own stories on it, I found that there isn't this effort to create this one big master database. It might have been a conversation, like there's a lot of conversations in the Trump administration, but if you have to think about how much information, it's like you can't even comprehend how much information the government has. Sure. And it's siloed by design in many different agencies. And even within those agencies, it's very siloed. Some of that is because the government's using old technology and could be doing it better. Like the Doge people say, well, there's a lot of truth to that too. Doge isn't the only one who said it, but there's another piece of that where it's like, it's by design so that for privacy, particularly in agencies like Social Security Administration, which Palantir works with very closely. Mm-hmm. So what I found was that if there was an effort to create a grand database, it would be such a big technical effort that we would have heard about it from a lot of other sources. What we do know is that they have made various attempts to combine data. The one that is known is that there's combining data with immigration and Social Security, and immigration and the IRS. And so what they're looking for undocumented immigrants, and they're using data which historically was never shared between agencies to, what I understand, to search records to see if they can cross-reference records in their quest to hunt down more undocumented immigrants in the country. And
this has the facial recognition software baked into it as well, because we've now seen the ICE people shoving their phones in people's faces to see if they can get a recognition that is connected somehow to the IDing that was done when they entered the country or not. So obviously, people who are undocumented are very nervous about this stuff, but it's nice to know that you think that they're not quite as far ahead with that as we have been told. Let's talk though about some of the characters behind this. Peter Thiel, you wrote a piece about some of the lectures. I've actually watched plenty of Peter Thiel lectures, and they are quite shocking. You wrote a piece inside billionaire Peter Thiel's private lectures, warnings of the Antichrist and US destruction. He does have a very kind of doomsday religious thinking that when I've heard him interviewed about it and talking about it, it seems to be at odds with this desire to kind of go down the tech road and take over the world with technology. He also wants to do away with the human race when I've heard him speaking privately. So what is this guy's politics, and how is that opinion shared, or how much is it shared by some of the other characters that you've mentioned in his orbit?
Well, I think Peter Thiel, and by the way, I have to say to your point about surveillance, I do think one of the biggest stories that's going to come out of the Trump administration, tech stories, will be the story about how technology that was being used to upscale this immigration enforcement push, how it became used on all of us, like how the surveillance state grew because of this push to find undocumented immigrants. I think that will be one of the bigger stories that emerges. All I was saying is I don't think it's all the information of the government in one grand database made by Palantir, which is sort of like the perfect conspiracy theory. And I don't think that's how it works. That said, is Palantir getting tons of business from the government, new business since the Trump administration came into power? Yes. Do they have lots of people advocating for themselves within that, for the company within that administration? Yes. Was Doge using them? Yes. Were there efforts to combine data? Yes. But maybe not the grand conspiracy theory, but definitely something to look at very closely on Thiel, and we will be, and we are on Thiel. Thiel, if you talk to people who are around Thiel, they'll tell you that he's the biggest pessimist of all of them, which is unbelievable considering his success and considering that the whole ethos of this world is around building the future. And certainly he wants to build the future. But he's not a utopian. He's, his friends call him a pessimist. He has a dark worldview. And I think it came out very much in these Antichrist lectures. Now, you got to step back and say, this was an interesting scoop for me to get. I had been with my colleagues, Natasha Tiku and Garrett DeVank. We did that together. And what was interesting is I had heard about these lectures happening at the Commonwealth Club. That's a big venue in San Francisco. I've moderated panels there. It's not like a secret billionaire cabal in Utah type of place. It's just central San Francisco spot. And I think one of the reasons, like, Thiel has always been a devout Christian, but he has never really led with his Christianity. As far as the people that I know who know him, like, have said, he doesn't lead with his Christianity. I don't think it's an accident that he's coming forward now, whatever months are into the Trump administration, and even in light of the passing of Charlie Kirk, the murder of Charlie Kirk, you saw this huge show of Christian nationalism in America, in probably what commentators were saying, that's the biggest unification of Christian imagery and language in a public government setting with government officials uniting Christianity and government. And then you look at a figure like Thiel. The tech world is historically very secular and was not friendly to religion. And that's been shifting in the last 2-3 years quietly. And I think it's no accident also that with the emboldening of Christian nationalism in the national discourse, that someone like Thiel is more willing to take his private beliefs and turn them into a very public stance. The other thing to think about with Thiel is that he always has a hate list. Like, he always has the people he hates and wants to take down. He's not on Twitter throwing meme bombs. He's not a flame throwing, person online. So he's more like the philosopher or the architect, and he's out there making lectures. But if you look at them, he's specifically calling for a call to arms against certain people. And that is very Peter Thiel. I remember watching him speak at a cryptocurrency conference in like 2022. And he gets out, he always has he often has like a slide presentation where he has actual images of people he hates. And at this crypto conference, he says, I want to read off to you my hate list, my personal hate list. And he's literally listing who people he thinks are the enemies of cryptocurrency that this audience should go after. He has done this in lectures around the world where he actually puts up these pictures of certain people. And in this case, he was very against the activist Greta Thunberg because she's been critical of AI. He was against the activist and writer Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is a prominent critic of the tech industry's approach to AI, what people might call AI doomerism. And it's almost like saying, not just should the tech industry have a debate about the limits of AI, but the people within that debate who are arguing for limitations on AI and guardrails. And you can see, I mean, the average person is nervous about AI. You can see the articles about young people who have committed suicide from having delusional conversations with chatbots. Like, there are risks. And we saw how even in some of these models, they could have turned the dials up or down. They chose to turn the dials up, just the way Facebook chose to turn the dials up on teen content when yes. What could they have done years ago? They debated years ago blocking adults from messaging minors. Okay. They decided not to do that. I mean, so if anyone we should be having a societal conversation about guardrails. And you have someone like Thiel who's saying anyone who even talks about guardrails is the Antichrist, not right. just a person you can debate with, but right. the messenger and emissary of the devil.
As I see it, Elizabeth, the people that you're talking about are inherently evil. That there is, just because you referred to him as successful earlier, and I really disagree with that. I don't think of Peter Thiel as a success at all. If anything, he is a disaster. And part of the problem is in the US, we tend to measure success by wealth rather than the goodness that you bring or doing something that benefits the country. And I don't see much that has come out of this kind of tech right that does really benefit the country. And you can argue the benefits of artificial intelligence, but to all intents and purposes, it is going to destroy humanity as we know it. And that's not just science fiction anymore. That is very much a real thing, partly because people don't really know that they are interacting with AI and they don't know what is real and what is generated. And we're starting to see that even with call centers and various things, those types of blue-collar jobs that humans used to do are now kind of null and void with this technology. But I also see the kind of Nazification of government through these individuals as well. Is it fair to describe these people as modern-day Nazis? I mean, they all seem to have the haircut.
I definitely can't go there. That is way beyond the purview of my reporting.
Isn't this the problem? Is that because the media is not able to make these connections and relies on people to, pontificate, that it means that we're never given enough warning. We're never really told that this stuff is really dangerous.
What are you referring to by, I'm curious if you could pull up more like the examples that you would speak to of Nazification.
Well, we're seeing it the way we mentioned ICE, but we're seeing people abducted off the streets, and we're seeing as a result of the tragic shooting in DC this week, Trump has now said that he is going to ban all immigration from third world countries. This idea that if you are white and wealthy, you can navigate this stuff, but if you are on a regular salary making $7.25 an hour, or you're a person of color, then you are really at the mercy of this regime. It has become very Nazified, and a lot of these individuals we've been discussing are very much part of this plan.
I mean, this is not me speaking per se as an area I've reported on. But I mean, obviously some of these images that have been circulated about how the immigration enforcement rate has been going on is they're very scary. I know people who are immigration lawyers who tell me that there are children at home who've spent weeks at home. They're out of school because their parents are afraid to send them to school, and they're in their homes with the curtains drawn. Yes. I'm the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor. So of course, and a citizen of the country. So of course, this is something that we all have to be very concerned about, how this enforcement is how the Trump administration is going about its enforcement. But to your question about the world that I cover around, are they Nazis? Are they're in full, the world that I cover is in full, which would be like what I would call the tech elites and the powerful business class. They're all very much in support of Trump's immigration push. When I ask about it, they always say, this is the president I voted for. But I don't think that they were necessarily the architects of that push. The architects of that are, from what I understand, are more like Stephen Miller. They're Bannon. It's more of also the populist side, because a lot of the people, some of the people who are involved in tech who supported Trump are themselves immigrants. Sometimes, Indian immigrants in particular.
Right. Well, Trump married 2 immigrants. I mean, so that there is contradiction there, of course, but without the technology that these people are supporting Trump with and providing and getting military contracts and government contracts with, Trump wouldn't be able to send bounty hunters out with software on their phones with their kind of Amazon military costumes and round people up.
Yeah, there's a role for the tech industry. One of the interesting things that I'd been looking into was there was a project at the Claremont Institute, which is a Trump allied think tank, called the Administrative State Project. And that one of the thinkers on that project was co-writing op-eds with the CTO of Palantir. So it was all about thinking around, there has been a lot of strategy and thinking around how the immigration and how technology and advanced tech companies like Palantir will further the immigration enforcement push that we're seeing in America. So, and I think right now, specifically around companies like Palantir, and I think we'll see it more on companies like Anduril, a lot of the tech companies that are working with DHS and DHS and ICE, a lot of those companies, Palantir has lost employees. There have been some small protests at its offices. There's a growing amount of criticism and controversy over those companies and the role that they're playing. And my attitude is they should also come clean about the role that they are playing, because they'll say, oh, you'll have this contract that they have from the government. Palantir's gotten some very new Palantir was brought in to work with immigration enforcement by Democrats. Okay. The Biden administration expanded their contracts. So it's not new that they're working with DHS, but DHS is changed under Trump. The mission is changing under Trump. And they have been clearly brought in as part of that expanded mission. They've gotten 2 massive new contracts with DHS. In those contracts, it talks about encouraging deportations. Then if you ask them, they'll say, no, we're not doing deportations. We're doing tracking. My attitude is come clean about what you are doing and what you aren't doing. So let the public have a debate about what it is that you're facilitating. I don't know, or if not, we'll just keep investigating it.
I think, that is the key, isn't it? Because no baddie will ever admit that they're the baddie. Trump thinks that he's the goodie and he's saving America. But in reality, this stuff goes back to Jim Crow and even earlier. There is still this kind of racism that is baked into all of the policy making. And my concern has always been that invariably people that report on these things are white and wealthy, and therefore they don't necessarily feel it in the same way that America is feeling it, which is not truly represented by the media. And so there is this kind of gap in the reporting of joining the dots to say that all of this work is inherently evil. And that's why I referenced Thiel's interviews and his lectures, because to me he sounds like an absolute madman. And we talk about him like, there is work here that he's doing and he did this and is strategic and that, but the guy is nuts. And that is problematic, because a lot of these people that hold senior positions, unofficial, unelected positions, are very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, a lot. Look at Elon Musk and his deputy Steve Davis. Steve Davis has never had a role in the government. Everyone I talk to says he still controls who gets hired right now. Right. He doesn't have a government position. But no, I'm not saying these are stuff. This stuff is huge cause for concern, and we're out there investigating it. So sometimes I can't speak or represent the whole mainstream media. What I can tell you is that I'm out there investigating it, and my role is these lectures were behind closed doors, and our work is showing them to the world. So you wouldn't be reading these lectures were not for our hard work.
Yeah,
and
100%.
And you can interpret it. So I'm going to stand by the integrity of the work that we do and the exposure that we have. And I try to create the conversation. I've also tried to create a conversation, like a forum in my work. Like, I asked Chris Buskirk directly, what do you say to the people who are out there on the street protesting No Kings, and say that you're ushering in a new generation of American oligarchs? Like, let's go there and let's have that conversation. His answer was revealing. He said, in every society, there's an elite. There's an extractive elite, and that's an oligarchy. And there's a productive elite, and a productive elite is called an aristocracy, not an oligarchy.
Yeah.
And that's what we are.
And they're so proud of that. I mean, that's the other thing as well, isn't it? I mean, where I'm from, people try to separate themselves from the aristocracy because it in some way kind of tarnishes your storyline. But I suppose in the US, certainly under a republic, with no kings, now we see the very wealthy wanting to be elevated and put onto these into this kind of hierarchy on these wealthy pedestals. Let's just talk very quickly about Doge. It has quietly been disbanded, it seems. Elon Musk, we know, kind of stepped away from the administration, but Doge has kind of quietly been shut down. What do you think the thinking is behind that?
Yeah, a few days ago, Scott Kapoor, one of the administration officials who comes from Silicon Valley, he said Doge doesn't exist. And he said Doge doesn't exist. It was interesting because a source just the week before had said the exact same thing to me. Literally, Doge doesn't exist. He said that it's basically been embedded and fused within the agencies, but you don't have this like central command coming from the White House. And what I've also heard from people who know Elon and talk to Elon is that Elon doesn't want to be, I don't know if the man knows. I've asked people, do you think he learned a lesson? And that's just not the way his mind works, or he doesn't have that kind of contrition bone in him. But he's no longer going to be like, sleeping overnight in the treasury with bringing a mattress. He's not going to be so deeply involved as he was before. And I think a lot of people within the Trump administration felt that they could have actually been more effective at dismantling the quote unquote administrative state. Like, they wanted to dismantle the administrative state and run so much of the administrative state with technology. They feel they could have been more effective at that if Elon hadn't been so public about everything he was doing. Like, he turned it into a show. The public became against it. Members of the administration, Scott Bessent is a friend of many people in the tech world. He and Elon do not get along. It's not a secret. He was not one of the people, as I understand. It's been reported that Sergio Gore was pushing back on Elon becoming closer to the White House again. But my understanding, it wasn't just Sergio Gore. It was other figures that Elon managed to alienate, like Bessent. And so you had this situation where you alienated members of the cabinet, where you caused a huge public outcry, and so you didn't complete your goals. And I think I look at the people that I know who want to do some of these things, have a vision of government as, they would have liked to cut more jobs than Trump or Elon were willing to do.
Right.
And they would have wanted to experiment even further with how you can use technological efficiencies to do work that is being done by government employees. That was all slowed down in some way by Musk being Musk. And so, yeah, I think what we make of it is that there are people who are very close to the government who are, and this is a good thought to part with, there are people who are close to the government who still have that mission, and I think will and are trying to effectuate it in quieter ways, less flashy ways. I think that Musk, for the whole country was preoccupied with the story of Musk, including us as reporters in the beginning. But I was always saying, even a year ago, you have to look at the other people in Silicon Valley and the 1789 capitals, you have to look, while Musk is almost a sideshow to the real business that Silicon Valley has with government. Look at HHS, look at the Pentagon, look at how things are changing at the Pentagon. We haven't even talked about that, like in terms of automation and the role of automation in American war fighting. That's going to be rapidly expanded under this Trump administration. So what I would say is Musk may not be as powerful, but Silicon Valley and the forces that both want to move technology into the government, in many cases, cut human labor and create more automation in everything from war to clinical trials, that's still moving forward.
And they're rushing it, it seems, maybe because they know they need Trump as a figurehead so that, you know, the world is distracted with Trump and his ridiculousness, whilst behind the scenes they are bringing about these types of policies and kind of getting these things ratified. That's my concern. Where does J.D. Vance just finally fit in?
People are rushing it because they're concerned about the midterms. Look, right now, look at the approval ratings. Like the midterms, they're not that long away. Yes. And, you know, there's only so much the executive branch can do. So they're rushing it because, you know, he may not have that much power. He may have much less power in a short time.
So finally, let's talk about J.D. Vance as a populist. He doesn't really fit into the same mold as being a former TV star as Trump was. He wasn't in Home Alone 2 or even Home Alone 3. So he doesn't have that kind of connective tissue that people feel, or indeed the name recognition. Although saying that, I saw my first Vance 2028 car sticker 2 days ago. And that was quite unnerving, I have to tell you. Do you think that the people, whoever they may be, voting for Republicans are going to be drawn to Vance, you know, with his face and his sarcasm and all of his annoying character traits? Does he have what Trump had in terms of that kind of horrendous star quality?
I don't think that he has the charisma of Trump. So, and I think, you know, the Republican Party is going to have a big contest in the next few years. What I do know is that Vance is the heir apparent. A lot of people very close to Trump and close to Don Jr. are definitely backing him. And Trump is, you know, he's made it his mission as vice president. Like, there was some good reporting in Newsweek from Dan Bush about how Trump calls Vance the athlete, and which is the idea of, like, you know, he's going the lengths for him. And this is what I hear from my sources too. He was looking at Kamala Harris and how she was given a very controversial mandate to fix immigration, and look where that ended up for her reputation. You know, it didn't help her candidacy. So Vance doesn't want to make that same mistake and fall into that trap.
Okay. I'm grateful to you for your reporting and for your expertise. Elizabeth Dwoskin, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thanks, Anthony. It was great to talk.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News or on my Substack at The Anthony Davis. You can also join the 5 Minute News YouTube channel, and I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.